I'm David Little. I am not an Amherst graduate, unfortunately, but I'm director and chief curator of the Mead Art Museum. And we are delighted to have you here today for this panel, Arts and Creativity from Amherst to a Career. And we have 4 distinguished speakers in the arts, and each of them will be presenting for 10 minutes, and then we'll have a conversation. And then at the end of the discussion, then hopefully you'll have questions for the panelists as well. Before I introduce everyone, I also just wanted to encourage you, if you get a chance, and if you haven't already, please stop by the Mead Art Museum. We have an amazing exhibition of the collection of John Whelan, who's celebrating his 60th anniversary here at Amherst. And John has accumulated over 40 years an extraordinary collection of about 320 artworks by the leading artists, contemporary artists in the world. And 58 of those pieces are on view at the Mead. John also just recently donated a $3 million gift to the Mead to support contemporary art and the activities of the museum, which are really focused on the curriculum and on the students. So if you have a chance, definitely stop by the Mead to take a look at that show. For our speakers today, we're going to start with Loretta Howard, and then I'm going to go through the group, and then each of the speakers will also have an opportunity to tell you a little bit about what they've been up to, and then fill in some of the gaps in terms of their careers in the arts. The first speaker is going to be Loretta Howard, class of '83. She's the owner of the Loretta Howard Gallery in Chelsea, which specializes in American painting and sculptures. Some amazing exhibitions and artists, including folks like Al Held. In addition to the gallery, Loretta was a graduate of the IFA, of the Institute, where she studied art history. And then importantly for the Mead, she is a member of the advisory board for the Mead and has been very generous to the Mead over the years. The next speaker will be, after Loretta, will be Roger Creel, class of 13. Roger is a company artist at the Louisville Ballet, and he's soon going to be beginning a geophysics Ph.D. at Columbia. Now that is so incredibly Amherst and so amazing. I have to say that I'm always amazed. We have roughly about 30 students that work at the Mead, and time and again I'll ask the students what they're working on, and they're both doing art history or English, and they're doing something on mathematics or something that I have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. So this is very much in the mode of extraordinary students and graduates of Amherst. And then we'll hear from Laura Scandrett, 88, a visual artist who is based in Santa Fe and has over 20 years of exhibiting and being an artist. I can't wait to see her work. And then last but not least, Erika Pettersen, class of '08, who is an administrator and a curator. She has really moved from photography to curating to administrating, and now she's going back to pursue her PhD at Tulane in Latin American studies. So without further ado, we'll start with Loretta. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Yeah, perfect. So, Loretta Howard, class of '83, and if one thought that college wasn't important to me in my curatorial work, you can see that Black Mountain College it was an exhibition that I did not so long ago, and it really is about a kind of cross-fertilization of a liberal arts institution, this one in North Carolina, and it was Joseph and Annie Albers, who were fresh from the Bauhaus, who came to this very small school and brought their interdisciplinary ideas from the Bauhaus to America. And you see people who were professors such as de Kooning, Robert Motherwell, Franz Klein, and they gave birth to students such as John Cage, Merce Cunningham, dance and composers, and we see Kenneth Noland, Robert Rauschenberg, Cy Twombly, so absolutely extraordinary in terms of the people who were there in a very tiny little place together. And I think that this is very much the way Amherst works, and what we enjoyed there. I remember my ILS, Introduction to Liberal Studies course, was something called Light. And I still don't know what that was. But somehow, I think the nature of cross-fertilization and this kind of studying across disciplines did have its impact, and is something that continues to interest me today in my curatorial work. Thank you, David. So John Ashbery, A Poet Among Things, certainly shows my interest. I was a double major in English and art history, and so here we have an art exhibition that I did based on a poet. But John was someone who actually did collages himself, but his whole life was a form of a collage. And if you've read his poetry, which I'm sure a lot of you have, it is enormously collaged in that sense. And so the idea of reading his poetry in and of itself is fine, but infinitely more interesting when you realize this is based on his home in Hudson, New York, in which he, when his first job out of Harvard was to review art exhibitions, even though he was a poet, and the New York School painters were what he really grew to love, and they became friends. And in fact, what you see here in the gallery is we reproduced his Hudson house in cartoon so that it wasn't sort of too heavy-handed, brought his furniture into the gallery, and then his art collection. So we see a Fairfield Porter portrait of John. Fairfield Porter actually taught at Amherst. He was a visiting art professor at one point. And again, it's just this idea of highlighting the intersections that we all have, and sometimes we tend to isolate and shouldn't. Let's see the next one. So this is a show that we did entitled Where Sculpture and Dance Meet, Minimalism. And it's, what you're seeing here is Lucinda Child's dance, called Dance, from 1979, in front of a Saul LeWitt sculpture. Saul LeWitt designed the sets for the dance, and Philip Glass did the music. It's absolutely stunningly beautiful. So we were screening historic performances along with the minimalist sculptures that influenced. And sometimes the relationship is very direct, like a collaboration, and sometimes there was a relationship, like Simone Forte and Robert Morris were married. And he had built, so the sculptor had built a dance platform for her to dance upon. And there were other kinds of relationships were not necessarily as direct as a collaboration. But it's, the idea here is really a shared dialogue about reductive language. And again, it's the concept that we're focusing on and crosses mediums. Again, absolutely like an ILS course, right? And finally, Artists at Max's Kansas City was an exhibition that dealt with bar culture. And this is pure Benjamin DeMott. So he showed me, and I'm sure all of us, what cultural studies was. And in this sense, we can look beyond the art itself and look to the culture that they're in and what they are dealing with. And it's very topical. We just all came from Biddy's talk at Johnson Chapel, where she's discussing campus culture. And that's something that that Amherst needs to work on a little bit. And I think that we had a fantastic culture. Certainly class of '83, we can say we had a really wonderful culture and energy and a sense of community in a particular place. And this particular place was the campus where we all gathered. And Amherst did a great job of it at that point. Max's Kansas City was a bar where Andy Warhol was in the back room every night. And then in the front bar you had people like de Kooning, who seems to be drinking a beer, and Robert Mapplethorpe, who was very young at that point and would come in with Patti Smith. And she writes about it in that wonderful book, Just Kids. But there's also a music culture going on. And this is before cell phones and texting, and you wouldn't need to sort of make a plan. You'd just go to Max's and you'd find friends and you would be able to discuss ideas. And that's what we all do still when we come here for reunion. We're talking about ideas, and that's the heart of Amherst, but it's very important for an art world. I mean, before Max's, we had the Cedar Tavern, which is where the abstract expressionists hung out, and before that, we could maybe say that the cafe life in Paris was central to the art world. But in a more sober way, it's really about gathering and our ideas. So that's what I have. Thank you.
Well, it's a real honor to be back here. I'm the most recent of the graduates on this stage. I've been out for 5 years, and my name is Roger Creel. I guess I currently don't dance with Louisville Ballet. I ended my season in April. But I wanted to give you a picture of what life as a professional ballet dancer looks like, both the training up to when you get a contract, and then during the contract, and then perhaps afterwards also. I started dancing when I was 9, and really got excited by dance when I was about 16 and went to a summer intensive. So you have to imagine hundreds of thousands of young people, mostly women, but some young men, going to these very, very rigorous summer academies in dance. From 3 weeks to about 7 weeks, where you dance 8 hours a day. And for a lot of us who didn't, in high school, spend our lives dancing, that's your introduction. And for me, that was the first time I discovered ballet intensively as a discipline, a language, a movement language. Although I didn't take it, the language of movement taught by Wendy Woodson at Amherst was the foundation of the theater and dance department. And sure enough, there are many movement languages of which ballet is only one. But it happens to be the vernacular for most ballet companies and most dance companies in the US. It's likely that every medium-sized city will have a ballet company, less likely that there will be other professional companies. So Louisville, for instance, had Louisville Ballet, and that's it. No other companies, whereas New York City will have lots of smaller companies. So when I arrived at Amherst, knowing that I wanted to dance, but also study the liberal arts, I took what Amherst had and augmented it with other classes from the 5 colleges. So there's a 5-college dance department in the Valley, and a bus system that shuttles you around, and pieces of seminal choreography that the 5-college dance department brings to Amherst and to Smith and Mount Holyoke and UMass every year that I danced in and others in the 5 colleges can dance in. While I was here, I danced pieces by Merce Cunningham and Doris Humphrey, who was the teacher of Jose Limon, Mark Morris, and a number of other smaller pieces, as well as I also guested guesting may be a term that you're not familiar with. It's when you join a company for a short time and perform professionally in a production. For me, usually guestings, one does Nutcracker. So it's common for especially men to become for the month of December a rent-a-prince. And go from small school to small school performing as the Cavalier and Nutcracker. And many freelance male professional dancers actually make much of their yearly income in December. Anyway, so Amherst happened. I fell in love with the geology department, but also my senior year auditioned for probably a dozen ballet companies, often driving to New York City on weekends and doing what they call cattle calls, which are these, appropriately named, 150 people walk into a room, and with numbers, you each take a number, and the artistic staff for Kansas City Ballet or Oklahoma City Ballet sit at the front of the room and watch you take a ballet class, which is a ritualized hour and a half that begins from simply from a plie, the foundation of the ballet, and then tendus, and then all the way up to like legs rabat in each direction, and then similarly from bar into center, 45 minutes of center. You start with the equivalent of plies at bar, and then by the end you're jumping across the room. So at a cattle call, you're watched, and then after plies, after about 5 minutes, they say, okay, thank you very much. We're going to keep number 15, number 18, number 33, and 3/4 of the room are excused. And it keeps getting whittled down until you're the last few at the audition, and then you walk up and you introduce yourself because they have your headshot and bio, and they say, well, it was lovely watching you dance, we'll call you. And then usually they don't call you. So an alternative strategy is to create an audition reel, a video that you send to various companies and hope that they watch it and like you enough that you'll fly down there to audition in person. And that's what I did with Louisville Ballet in April of my senior year of Amherst. And only one company called me, and I got the job, mostly by chance. There's a lot of privilege in the ballet world. It takes a lot of money to train a dancer. That money could be scholarships for the lucky few. It could be resources from your family. One of my best friends in the ballet company grew up in East LA, the daughter of migrant field workers, and her name's Erika, and her mother cleaned studios and cleaned toilets to put Erika through enough ballet schooling that eventually Erika got a job, and now she's a principal dancer. But those stories are really, unfortunately, few. However, even with privilege, the number of people who luck into a job are also very few. So, I arrived in Louisville Ballet. Here we are at Louisville. Louisville Ballet is a medium-sized ballet company that does, as is typical of ballet companies of about 26 dancers, does some contemporary repertoire choreographed by mostly living choreographers. The not at all rigorous distinction in the dance world between contemporary and modern that wouldn't stand up to any sort of critical scrutiny is that contemporary ballets have shoes on and modern ballets don't have shoes on. Ballet shoes. Contemporary ballets, and then the war horses, the nutcrackers that earn income for the company, Swan Lake, Sleeping Beauty, the ballets that people who've never heard of a ballet might come to. And beyond those war horses, only the few come to see a performance relatively. So I found myself in this ballet company and realized that Amherst had taught me a lot of things that I needed to know, but also Amherst had taught me or I hadn't taken the time to learn a lot of things that I needed to know in the company. Because a ballet company is a tribe. It's a mostly working class, small group of people who see each other for 8 hours a day and don't converse about the life of the mind, don't read very much, but go through the equivalent of war on stage regularly. So you're bound by ties of comradeship and shared adrenaline more than mind connections. And at Amherst, I think, like a lot of us here, I got very excited by the life of the mind, and then discovered, and made most of my friendships on that basis, and then discovered that in the ballet world, at least, if you think of a ballet company sort of like an army, on the infantry soldier, enlisted soldier side, which is the dancers, those conversations are fewer than the conversations of how are we going to get through this? How's your body doing? Can I help you? Basic human. And therefore, the way to rise through the ballet company is not by writing essays, but by building a network and developing relationships with everybody, even the people I didn't initially cotton to. It turns out that I learned a lot from Kim Townsend's friendship class in that regard, but I didn't know that I was learning that until I got into the ballet company. So at the risk of going on too long, I think I'll go. So Balanchine, contemporary, and classical works. I also danced beyond Louisville as a guest artist and training at various places. Jacob's Pillow on the left. I hope everybody here gets a chance to go to Jacob's Pillow. It's in Western Massachusetts. It's the equivalent of Tanglewood except for dance. And it's a summer festival that lasts 10 weeks, and all the best dance companies in the world attempt to get invited to Jacob's Pillow, and some of them do get invited. Jacob's Pillow, I came back to the Pioneer Valley and performed in a Leonardo da Vinci ballet in 2015 called More Clearly in Dreams. And then collaborated with photographers. Julius Friedman was a photographer who died recently, Louisville-based. You have your baseline experience of dancing in a company, and then you supplement it with as much creative nurturing as possible, because when you're training, you're taught, but when you're in a company, you're expected to execute, and occasionally there's coaching. The administrative staff, the artistic staff, the ballet masters who set the choreography on you, who teach you the choreography, coach you also, as does the artistic director. But those kernels of learning that at Amherst are so freely doled out are much more precious after Amherst. And I think we all should be lucky that we had those here. I think to finish, I want to talk about my most creative efforts, which were choreographing. So several years back, I, as part of Louisville Ballet's Choreographer Showcase, which is this in-studio, low-stakes, company dancers choreograph a 10 or 15-minute piece for the company, and then it's performed, low production values. I pitched and was approved to choreograph a ballet that married Appalachian folk music with Shakespearean sonnets. And it seemed fitting because in the 60s there were some linguists who thought that some Appalachian dialects were actually remnants of Elizabethan English. Turns out that's probably not true, but that started the thought process at least. So I made this ballet. I had an actor on stage speaking the sonnets, and Kentucky Shakespeare saw this and said, "That's pretty good. Why don't you expand it and put it on our outdoor festival?" Kentucky Shakespeare has this 10-week-long free outdoor festival. So I made a 40-minute ballet with 22 sonnets and a newly composed score, mostly Appalachian folk music and fiddle tunes, called William's Folly, tracking the story, the most obvious story in the 152 Shakespearean sonnets, that of, if you just read them at face value, which I recognize as a tenuous notion, an older man falling in love with a younger man, and then also having an affair with a more middle-aged woman, the Dark Lady, and then having his heart broken by both. So that was 2 years ago. Last summer, they liked that enough that they asked me to make a full-length ballet. So I made a gender-swapped version of King Lear that I called Lady Lear. And so I had a female Lear, 3 sons instead of 3 daughters. I had to collapse a number, and depending on how well you know Lear, this will register or not, but I had to collapse a lot of characters. So the Duke of Kent, the Dukes of Kent and the Duke of Gloucester became Kentster, for instance. And then, so this summer, I'm choreographing The Tempest, to be performed in early August. The music is currently being composed. I hope it's finished by July 1st when I start working. I've enlisted the help of 2 step choreographers. Step is a genre of dance somewhere between hip hop and tap, I suppose, but it's its own genre, and it's body percussion. I'm not proficient in it, which is why I hired a choreographer to help me, but the spirits on the island to which Prospero arrives will be stepping. So the storm that shipwrecks all of the people who took Prospero's kingdom onto the island will be a storm of sound. I think that's where I should end, to say that life in the arts is a glorious one, and I will continue.
Actually, not slideshow. So the images that are going to be projected here are just a few starting 15 years ago. That they're going to be in chronological order, so you can kind of see some of the things I've been making over the few years, but I'm starting with this one because it was, it's basically about this size. I make very large drawings, and people I went to school with know that that's what I was doing at Amherst, making large drawings, and that's basically what I've kept doing. I remember I did not know what I wanted to do when I came to Amherst, and I had a theme all through high school and college that my mother gave me, which was like, keep your options open. And so it's part of why I came to Amherst, and I loved having open options. But eventually I liked to read, so I basically just took classes I wanted to take. And so I became an English major. And I wasn't crazy about writing, actually, but I did take art classes all along. And it was the end of my junior year that one of my art professors, who was my advisor since I had gotten to school, asked me to come to his office, sat me down, and he said, when are you going to admit you're an artist? And it actually frightened me. I didn't say a word. It didn't excite me at all. I mean, I knew I was, but to commit to it was a little frightening. you can go ahead and advance to the next image. So just to say that, like, yes, from then on, you know, coming right out of school, knew that that's what I was going to pursue as a career. I've never stopped, and that has been the constant in my life, is making art. The career part has been very up and down. I've had all kinds of day jobs. I've had some periods where I could just be an artist and make enough money. These are works. This one's, again, this is Lifesize. So I about 15 years ago is when I was lucky enough to just have a great gallery in Santa Fe asked me to join, and Linda Durham, she's still my dealer. She's closed her gallery, but she now is my dealer privately. And it changed my life because I am not someone who wants to put a lot of effort, or I'm just someone who it doesn't come naturally to think about the art market. And so it changed my life when someone just believed in me and started handing me checks for work. And it gave me a lot of freedom, you know, in what to do with the work. So, and these are charcoal on paper, so they are framed. They're very large frames, obviously.
And are they about this size here?
They are, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so this one is 8.5 feet wide, 5 feet. So it's about like that, it's about like that. And then I started also just doing installations directly on the wall. This is a show in Aspen. Some museums and galleries would invite me to do these kind of shows that were very important to me because, like in this show, there was nothing for sale. You know, you were just doing installations for the experience. And I guess the reason I chose these few images you're seeing is that for me, they're important pieces. They mark certain points in my development, or just, you know, not just career-wise, but in my development of becoming clearer and clearer and more honest about what I'm trying to do with art and why I became an artist. So this piece actually is titled Nostalgia. And when I was coming up in the art, you know, studying art, I mean, I've always been studying art. Right after Amherst, I moved to the East Village, because once I decided to be an artist, I thought I was going to be Basquiat and be like going down 2nd Avenue, flinging money out of the car. But, you know, New York chewed me up and spit me out. But no, that's where I got a real education, just constantly going to mostly museums. I was not that interested in galleries at the time. I mostly went to museums, and really at Amherst I learned, and thank goodness I did, a very traditional academic art training, both with history and with practice. You know, learning to really oil paint and to really draw, which frankly they don't do in a lot of schools anymore, even undergraduate. People are like conceptual artists at 14. And so I'm very grateful to the way I learned. Even though I, you know, fought a lot at times with my teachers about that kind of structure, I really appreciate that it was the same, it was very parallel to what I was learning in literature. Or, did I take anything else? No, I mean I did, but you know, science, you know, just things that, you know, I did, you know, some theater, some math, some science, geo, we really aced geology, yeah. But there is, you do start to, you know, it is all about seeing those connections. And I knew when I did decide to be an artist that for me, it was actually not just going to be the most interesting thing I could do, but the most challenging. And I knew that it was not going to be always comfortable, and it wasn't always going to be, you know, even easy economically, or, you know. But for me, and growing, I feel like I was part of a tradition that suffering was kind of a part of great artists' experience. It doesn't always have to be, you know, money, you know, or emotional, or it's just, but some kind of just, I guess something about like being really honest with putting it first, whatever it takes. So whatever it takes, and to not stop. For me, not stopping has been the key, because like I said, in terms of what other people think, or when I get paid for something or not, that all just comes and goes. But what doesn't ever change is my excitement about it, my excitement of going in the studio. Let's see what the next slide is, I'm not sure. And I wanted to show something, and for me, everything I think of as drawing based, and it's what I was drawing all the time as a kid. I just never thought of it as art, but that, to me, this is an installation that it was kind of hard to document, but what's going on, I just wanted to explain that I do some things that come from drawing, but can be action-based or experiential, and that through the work, when I look at a few of my things together like this, what I'm reminded of is that for me, it's kind of all documentation. To me, I feel like I'm documenting my own life. I make things about what I feel, what I care about, and then occasionally someone else feels something, and they don't need to feel what I feel, but it's exciting when someone else has an experience with something you have made. This is a piece. In the back there are photographs of individual stones, rocks. Actually, the people here who've known me a long time know I grew up spending summers in Colorado, and I'm still very emotionally attached to that place. And so what I did for a project a few years ago, is I made a portrait of my favorite mountain. And so that's a very large ink drawing on silk, hanging a little before the wall, a video projected on it that was just me, a GoPro of me climbing the mountain. And then what I did is I climbed the mountain repeatedly, and it was really hard. When I was a kid, it was easy. It's almost 14,000 feet footer, that's what they say, 14 footer. It's just under 14,000 feet. As a kid, it wasn't that hard. It takes all day, but now it was a lot harder. And I would carry these rocks down in a backpack, photograph each one. The whole mountain is basically just tiny rocks, but it's so massive, not just, as a geological structure, but it's like massive emotionally in my life, this mountain. I have a very long history of it. My family does, tragedy and beautiful things have happened there. So for me, it was kind of breaking down these individual rocks and making these portraits. I did a lot of them. I just decided that in this space, this is how many fit for this installation. But they're kind of portraits of these individual rocks. And then I climbed up and returned each of them. And then to the left there is just one actual rock that I brought. This was a show in New York, so I brought the rock to New York, and then at the end of the show did return it to the mountain as well. But the one, it did say on that rock, it said, "Please touch," just so that people could touch part of the mountain, and it's something about that may be carried back to the mountain. So let's see what's next on that. And then this, again, they may seem a little all over the place, but I have a pretty, I think what's consistent for me, like I said, is obviously my aesthetic. I rarely use color, and it's very personal work. And this actually was in a show 2 years ago in Santa Fe. Actually, my agent called me up. She was organizing a group show, and it was a show called, she was guest curating, I guess. Someone else had the idea. It was called She Rose. And so she said, would you do it? And blah, blah, blah. And you can do anyone you want. Someone's doing Emily Dickinson. Someone's doing Maya Angelou. I said, I already know who I want to do. And I said, can I just do a friend of mine? And she said, yeah. And so this is when our classmate, Julie, was in the final stages, just a few months to live. And so this, again, this is life-size. So it's about human size. And it just, it was about the body and this kind of, Rorschach image and kind of fading, and she actually got to come to the show. Julie was at the opening and had a blast. It was the last trip she actually made out of LA. But just to say that, and then of course my agent later, like, people were interested in the work, and this guy who wrote, the local art critic, ended up focusing his article like on this and even on Julie. And then later, because I made a series of them, I often work in series. And this is the one I showed in that show, and then my agent was like, okay, but now when we sell them, can we just like hush on the cancer story? And I'm like, yes, it's an interesting, it's just kind of the funny thing between marketing and what's really going on. Let's see what's next. And then this is a piece, I put this, I actually love this piece, but I wanted to say one of my my favorite thing, my favorite exhibition space is when good friends of mine have my work in their home, and it's not just backdrop, it's like it's a part of their lives. So this is a little smaller than this. This one's like 5 feet square, and it's in Carla's kitchen. And it's just like when I get to go there and visit it, or when she or her daughter say something about it, like for me, that's actually the pinnacle of exhibiting, is not so much, of course you're honored to be in shows in different places, or I've had 2 shows in Europe, and that was very exciting. But it's really something to have your work.
Or you can always come to the beach.
Oh, okay, those are. And then let's escape. I think I wanted to show also just, this is going to be just a piece of the digital film. It's a very long film. I want to show it to you and then tell you what it is. Can you enter full screen? Oh, I thought that was, sorry. Can you see enter full screen? And then if you just press this space bar, it should play. I don't wear my glasses. Sorry, guys. Can you see a view?
Yep, I see you.
All right. Let's just play it. Let's just hit the space bar. Let's mix them right over here. And then just press the space bar maybe. And so what this is, so I also sometimes work in moving images, but this is a piece that is called Spewing Life. And what it is for a few months in Manhattan, I just walked around taking still photos of the gum spots on the sidewalk, and then incorporated them into this digital film. And I also just want to say that, like many of the people Loretta mentioned, I mean, those are my heroes. My heroes are mostly these white guys in the 50s who are living in New York. And like, when people want to ask you to classify yourself as an artist, I just recently thought, well, I want to be like this contemporary feminist abstract expressionist. Like just aesthetically, that's the work that really, still just keeps inspiring me. And so it's always interesting to me to keep studying history, studying artists, and then try and find a way to do something that they probably couldn't do, or they couldn't do because they didn't have the technology. And that's it.
Hi everyone. Once again, my name is Erika Pettersen. I'm class of 2008. I want to start off firstly by thanking Barbara for inviting me to speak today. It's not often that you have moments to really take a step back and think about where you've been, where you are, and where you're going. So I really appreciate this opportunity to do this, particularly within the context of my experience at Amherst. And so my experience at Amherst was a journey full of exploration. I came to Amherst envisioning that I was going to be a novelist. So I had this very naive idea of what my future would be. And I had this very specific sense that I had to become an English major because that's what made sense. That's what I thrived in during high school. And so when I came to Amherst and we were thrown into this situation called an open curriculum where you could take pretty much any class you wanted to, I really believe that that's what allowed me to break free of my preconceived ideas of what I should be as a person in this world, basically. And I'm very grateful for that. It allowed me to explore beyond, again, what I initially thought I would be doing in life. And so, actually, during my first semester at Amherst, I applied for a creative writing course. I got rejected, even though I got this very, lovely letter from the professor saying, like, it was a really hard choice not to accept you. But it was still soul-crushing, obviously. And so I think because of the open curriculum, I was able to take that moment of what felt like, soul-crushing rejection, and to really jump back from that and to find resilience in myself through exploration. And so my second semester at Amherst, I ended up taking an intro to philosophy course, and that really just blew my mind, and that's how I became a philosophy major. And so through my coursework in philosophy, it was this very exciting theoretical exploration of the world around me and existence itself. And through that process, I ultimately came upon the arts. I took an aesthetics class, and I became really interested in ideas around what is art, what is beauty, and it only seemed natural to kind of jump into that in a more practical, hands-on manner. So I ended up taking a number of photography classes with Justin Kimball, which ended up being really seminal experiences for me. Ultimately, I was very, very compelled by the art of street photography. And so that once again became this additional mode of exploration. And so I was very compelled by the work of Henri Cartier-Bresson and his idea of the decisive moment. But I was also very compelled by Robert Frank and his exploration of the United States and his documentation of what was going on at that very particular point in time in the world. And so through my introduction to street photography at Amherst, I ultimately ended up pursuing that in the real world. And so I eventually moved from black and white, which was what we mostly dealt with at Amherst, into the worlds of color. And it was through the worlds of color that I became particularly interested in details in the world around us. And particularly, I'm someone who grew up in New York City, but coming back to New York City after Amherst was obviously a new experience, seeing New York through new eyes. And I became very interested in the small details, the changes in persisting structures, whether it's through man-made intervention or just through the weathering of time. So this photo here, play here, is one example of that. It's part of a series I called Urban Intentions. Once again, really looking at what the built world can tell us about the human world in New York City in particular. So I chose this photo to share with you because I think it very much embodies my journey. And at the time, I think I took the photo because I was intrigued by the juxtaposition here, these signs of, very typical New York Lotto signs, and seeing them up against this kind of strange skyscape, I guess you could say, where there's this part of a tree that's very lush, and then the other part is very spare. And I felt it embodied, or at least at the moment, it felt like a challenge. Like there's fruits out there, but there's also, failures out there. Take a risk, take many risks, which I have throughout my career in the arts. And so, once again, I really think, again, the open curriculum not only allowed me to explore, but to develop a sense of accountability to myself, because no one except your advisor who's kind of helping you sort through the different classes and kind of just hearing your thoughts on why you want to pick such and such classes, it really made me feel like I'm accountable to myself. There's so many people in the world who could tell you what you should be doing, but you really have to listen to yourself. And so in order to really thrive in the arts, that's really the mode you have to be in. And so that I've really taken with me from my experience at Amherst. But also from my experience at Amherst, I really developed a sense of accountability to the world around me as well. I felt very blessed to have the opportunity to engage with what was called the Community Outreach Center at the time. I'm not sure what the name for that particular center at Amherst is at the time, but currently. But at the time, I was tutoring at El Arco Iris, which is in Holyoke, which is, a little ways down from here. And it's a town that was once a thriving space full of industry, but, fell into decay once the industries there, I believe it was steel, were no longer thriving. And so there's a community there that clearly doesn't have as much as many of us here at Amherst do. And it was really meaningful to me to know that even at a place like Amherst, even at a place where we're kind of steeped in privilege, ultimately, there are opportunities to connect with other communities that can benefit from our talents. So that was deeply meaningful to me, and it ultimately set me up well for when I was exploring modes to continue pursuing photography. I ended up working as a teaching artist at an organization called Arts East New York in East New York, Brooklyn. And so this is another community that, has fallen into the influences of blight and a lack of investment in that community in Brooklyn, New York. And I ended up working at this organization in its third year, actually volunteering as a teaching artist. And through that work, I became really invested in the mission of the organization. The organization was founded in response to gun violence in the community and as a way to provide youth with something better to do than hang out on the streets and get into trouble ultimately. And as I was there, it was growing into it had quite a big vision as I was spending more and more time there. And ultimately, through my work as a teaching artist, I was asked to also curate exhibitions at the space. And that was a really exciting opportunity for me, and it was one of these moments where, because I felt so comfortable and kind of just wading through experiences and learning about different ways of being, I was ready to jump into it. And so through that experience, I then was asked to do grant writing because the organization wanted to grow, but didn't have many resources to make that happen. And so that's how I entered the world of arts administration, and in particular, development work, fundraising work. And so what's kept me in this realm is, I guess we can go to the next photo. And ultimately what's kept me in this realm is my fascination with the fact that everywhere you go, there are people who are So, they're artists that are in the the least likely of places. So this can kind of provide as a transition from my work at Arts East New York to where I ended up working next, where I'm currently working, Haiti Cultural Exchange. It's an organization that is devoted to presenting Haitian arts and culture in New York City. And I had the amazing opportunity to travel to Haiti through this work. And so this is a photo of an artist in Haiti who was literally just walking down the street as I was walking down the same street with his canvas, and he asked me to take a picture of him. And so I just feel as though this moment is just very symbolic of what I've found throughout my travels in the worlds of the arts, and why I'm compelled to work in communities where you would least expect to see this kind of artistry and creativity, because many of these people are not given the opportunities to present their points of view. And in a world where we're becoming increasingly global, I think it's increasingly important to give a platform to these artists. And so, again, I'm currently the Development and Communications Director at Haiti Cultural Exchange. The next photo kind of embodies the work of the organization. It's not a photo I took, just full disclosure there. It's a photo taken by Kayla Mellon, a young woman that we worked with. And so, the work of the organization, as was the case with Arts East New York, is incredibly ambitious, and for good reason, because just as in the case of East New York, within the Haitian community, there just is a huge lack of resources. And so with this organization, there's a lot of ambition, but not the funding to match that. And so through working with these organizations that are under-resourced, I've really developed a passion for furthering their missions and really following the lead of these communities of color. And so I guess I'll end it there because it's time. Thank you.
Thank you all for your presentations. We're actually almost done. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to ask one question, and then we'll open it up to the audience and go from there. Thank you all for your presentations, and thank you as well to Barbara. It was really striking to hear perspectives from curatorial, from dance, from creation, from both drawings as well as photography. And the topic here is creativity in the arts, and I'm just wondering if each of you could talk about the role of creativity specifically to your work after Amherst, and just what your notions of creativity are. So maybe you could start out.
Got to go for 50 words or less.
It's like the creativity class.
I think I associate creativity with a state of flow, which comes from long practice. When you first start out dancing, you don't know what your limbs are and where they are and what you're trying to do with them and what they're doing. And as you dance more, and I think this is true for most art forms, you come to control your instrument and build connections, like in the neuroscientists would call it myelinizing your neurons, like increasing the speed of connections between, for a dancer, neurons and limbs, and to the point where consciousness almost fades away, and you're not sitting in your head critiquing yourself as you move, as you make, but instead are immersed in the flow. So that's creativity.
Loretta?
Well, I always have to correct people when I say I have a gallery. They said, "Oh, do you make art?" No, I'm a curator. I'm an art historian, and it's a very different discipline. It has a lot to do with research and history. But within that, I think one can be incredibly creative. you're celebrating others' creativity in a sense, but when I first had the idea of Black Mountain College as an exhibition, I thought, don't tell anyone, you know, because it's such a good idea. I don't want anyone to know. And then how, you know, how does that play out, and what are you bringing in? And we screened, you know, videos of dance performances, and Buckminster Fuller erecting the first geodesic dome, and this is really exciting. It's really creative to pull this all together. And the same with the John Ashbery, and it's a peculiar exhibition, and I was so pleased to be able to do something that was quite unique in curatorial terms, I think. So there is creativity in the curatorial world, and I love it.
Laura, you talked about suffering. I don't know if you want to talk about suffering or what. That is one part of creativity.
Yeah, maybe it is. I guess it's when you said that, and even when I saw it in the thing, I have to say, I honestly don't use that word. I haven't heard that word. I just don't think about that word for a long time. Creativity. There's a lot of creativity out there. I guess what comes to mind to say is just that in my own practice, maybe what I associate now or replace that word with is experimentation. I mean, maybe that feels like the most creative part of my job is experimenting to where you feel like you're almost inventing something. So, which could happen in any field, you know.
I guess creativity for me is exploring possibilities, which is very much in line with what I was talking about earlier. But lately I've been very interested in exploring possibilities in a way where how can we integrate the ambitions of multiple different entities through the arts, because I think the arts has the potential to be a very useful creative tissue or connective tissue. And so through the arts, there are a lot of opportunities for disparate groups within a particular community, as I've found in my work, whether it's through a geographic community or a cultural community, for multiple entities within those communities to explore with each other through the arts and explore possibilities in the arts.
Thank you. All right, so we'll open it up to the audience. Questions? You're ready to go back to your tents.
Yeah.